Hello, my name is Teresa. I'm 67 years old, and I want to share something that happened to me last Thanksgiving. I went to my daughter's house expecting warmth, laughter, and the simple comfort of family. I imagined sitting around the table, sharing stories, and enjoying the holiday together. But as the night grew late, everything changed. In the middle of the night, she told me I was annoying her and asked me to leave. I didn't argue. I just walked out into the cold, the rain soaking my coat and hair, feeling a pain deeper than any storm outside. I found myself sitting alone on the curb, holding a plate of the food I had barely touched, watching through the window as my family laughed, oblivious to my suffering. Each laugh felt like a sharp reminder that I had been discarded, that the people I loved most could turn their backs so easily. My heart ached, and I couldn't understand how a night meant for love and connection could become one of loneliness and humiliation. The rain poured down harder, mixing with the tears I could no longer hold back, and for a long while I just sat there, cold, hungry, and invisible. Then, out of nowhere, a homeless man appeared, offering me shelter. I hesitated, unsure why a stranger would care about someone so clearly abandoned. But he didn't ask questions. He simply said I could come with him to a warm place, a safe place. And then he told me something that left me completely in shock, something that would change the way I saw everything that had happened. I can still feel the weight of his words and the strange mix of fear and hope they gave me. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading the comments and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story really began. The rain had been falling steadily for hours when I found myself sitting on the cold, wet curb outside Claire's house in Portland, Oregon. My coat, once a deep navy blue, was soaked through, clinging to my shoulders, and the sandwich I had unwrapped from its wax paper wrapper tasted like nothing, its cold bread and pale turkey doing nothing to warm my shivering body. I kept my eyes fixed on the window of the dining room, watching Claire, her husband David, and their friends laugh and raise glasses of wine in celebration, the warm golden light of their house spilling out into the wet night. That laughter, once comforting, now pierced me like a shard of ice, reminding me how utterly alone I had become. I should have been there, sitting at the table where my place had been carefully set, surrounded by family and the familiar chaos of Thanksgiving. Yet here I was, abandoned, invisible, a ghost left outside in the storm. I hugged my knees to my chest, feeling the chill seep into my bones, and tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that this was temporary, that surely someone would notice. But the seconds stretched into minutes, and the laughter continued uninterrupted. I closed my eyes, willing the sting of the rain on my face to fade, when a gentle voice broke through the sound of falling water. "Ma'am, you're going to catch pneumonia out here." I opened my eyes to see a man standing a few feet away, holding a torn umbrella that barely shielded him from the downpour. His clothes were worn but clean, his face calm and kindly. I hesitated, unsure why a stranger would approach me on such a miserable night. I'm fine," I muttered, brushing raindrops from my hair. "You don't look fine," he said simply. "Come with me. You can dry off for a while." His tone wasn't demanding, nor patronizing. There was a quiet sincerity in his eyes, a softness that reminded me of someone I hadn't thought of in years, my late husband, Robert. I blinked, my throat tightening, and for the first time that evening, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. He introduced himself as William, a homeless man who had carved out a small, surprisingly organized shelter under the bridge nearby. The cardboard walls were reinforced with tarps and old furniture, and inside, the smell of damp wood and lingering smoke from a small camping stove greeted me. He handed me a thick, worn blanket, and the warmth enveloped me like a fragile promise. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly, pulling a small, faded wallet from his coat. Inside were photographs of a little girl with wide eyes and a shy smile. His voice cracked as he traced a finger over her face. I noticed his hands, clean and steady, the hands of someone who had not always lived this way. There was a dignity in the way he moved, a calm in the way he spoke, and for the first time in months, I felt a fragile sense of hope. We sat together, huddled under the fragile protection of the tarp, sipping instant coffee he had heated over the small stove. The rain fell around us, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to echo the ache in my chest. Words came slowly at first, hesitant and careful, but gradually we began to speak. He asked about my life, and I told him in fragments, the pain spilling out in small, shuddering bursts. I told him about Claire, about the home I had once loved and now felt like a stranger to. He listened without interruption, without judgment, his presence steady and grounding, a beacon in the darkness that had been swallowing me whole. As dawn approached, the rain slowed, leaving a mist that hung over the city like a soft blanket. We sat in silence for a long time, the comfort between us unspoken yet palpable. And then, just as the first pale light of morning began to streak the sky, William's voice cut through the quiet with an urgency that made my heart constrict. "I found something in your daughter's trash," he said, his eyes locking on mine. "Something you need to see." I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands trembled, a combination of cold, fear, and a creeping dread that clutched at my stomach. The warmth of the blanket suddenly felt inadequate against the weight of what he was about to reveal. And yet in that moment, I realized something profound. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was not entirely alone. Someone, unexpectedly, was standing with me in the storm, offering more than shelter. They were offering a fragile thread of hope, a lifeline back to the world I had begun to lose faith in. And as I followed him toward the bridge, shivering but determined, I knew that the events about to unfold would change everything. The rain had washed away the illusions of safety I had clung to, leaving only raw truth and the faint, glimmering possibility of redemption. William's small hands trembled slightly as he handed me the first set of crumpled papers, which he had smoothed carefully on the makeshift table in his cardboard sanctuary. The papers felt fragile under my fingers, as though they carried not only words, but the weight of a betrayal I wasn't prepared to fully comprehend. I unfolded the first one slowly, my eyes scanning the words like someone trying to will them into being a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the lines leapt off the page with a cold precision that made my stomach tighten. Emails between Claire and a lawyer, discussing in chilling detail ways to accelerate my mother's passing. I gasped, the breath catching in my chest. My hands shook violently as I moved to the next sheet, the paper slick with my nervous sweat. The phrases seemed almost unreal: insurance policy, inheritance timeline, accidental fall. My mind spun, desperately trying to reconcile the daughter I had raised, my little Claire with her laughter, her warmth, her mischievous grin, with the woman orchestrating schemes so monstrous I could barely comprehend them. "This can't be real," I whispered, my voice fragile, almost swallowed by the dim light under the bridge. William's eyes were steady, unflinching. He pointed to a signature on a document requesting information about untraceable substances, Claire's unmistakable scrawl, neat and confident. His hand lingered on the paper, and I could see the weight of the truth reflected in his gaze. "I recognize legal manipulation when I see it, Teresa," he said quietly, his tone grave. "Your daughter is planning something terrible." A surge of anger rose within me, hot and wild, and I felt the urge to storm back to Claire's house immediately, to confront her with every ounce of maternal fury I had left. My teeth clenched, my fists shook. But before I could act, William's hand gripped my arm firmly, grounding me with calm authority. "Evidence first," he said gently, yet with a firmness that brooked no argument. "Emotion later." I looked at him, bewildered, but I could feel the wisdom in his restraint. Anger without proof would leave me powerless. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and together we began the painstaking work of piecing together more documents he had been collecting for weeks. He explained that he had noticed suspicious activity around Claire's behavior, the way she casually discarded receipts, the subtle hints of secretive phone calls, and had started monitoring her trash, meticulously collecting anything that might reveal her true intentions. Hours passed in a haze of paper, coffee, and the quiet sound of rain dripping from the bridge. Every document we smoothed, every note we examined, confirmed my worst fears. Claire had been forging my signature on multiple documents, slowly transferring assets from Robert's estate into accounts I didn't recognize. It was deliberate, cold, systematic. I felt as though the floor beneath me had been yanked away, leaving me suspended in a cruel limbo of disbelief and heartbreak. That evening, as the dim light of the makeshift shelter cast long shadows across the walls, I finally spoke the question that had been clawing at my chest all day. "Why are you helping me?" My voice was almost a whisper, fragile, betraying the raw vulnerability I felt. William's eyes softened, and I saw something that stopped my racing heart, a depth of empathy, of understanding, of shared suffering. "Because when I needed help, no one believed me," he said quietly, his gaze steady. "I won't let that happen to you." There was a pause, a weighty silence that settled over us, the kind that made a fragile trust grow between two people who had known only abandonment and betrayal. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Besides, your daughter threw away a document with my old company's letterhead. She's working with the same people who destroyed me." His words hung in the air, an echo of loss, betrayal, and the cruel coincidences of life. I felt a lump rise in my throat, not just from fear of what Claire had planned, but from an unexpected gratitude for this man, this unlikely ally who had given me a lifeline when I was ready to fall completely apart. There was a quiet dignity in the way he had positioned himself beside me, in the way he had carefully arranged the documents and guided me through the labyrinth of deceit, never pressuring, never rushing, simply standing as a steady presence in the chaos of my unraveling world. We worked in silence for a while after that, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of paper or the distant rumble of the city waking up under the mist. I could feel the enormity of what we were uncovering pressing on me, yet there was also a spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. For the first time since the rainy night outside Claire's house, I began to believe that survival was possible, that reclaiming not only my inheritance but my dignity and autonomy could be real. I noticed William's hands again, the way they moved deliberately, carefully, handling each fragile sheet as though it contained not just information, but life itself. I realized then that his careful attention mirrored my own need to reclaim control over my world, to take back what had been stolen not just from me materially, but emotionally. And in that fragile bridge shelter, amid the dim light and the lingering scent of coffee and damp cardboard, a silent bond had formed. A bond forged in betrayal, trust, and the unspoken understanding that together we could begin to fight back against a world that had tried to discard us. As night fell and the rain outside finally began to subside, I wrapped myself in the warm blanket William had given me and looked at him, a sense of determination coiling within me like a spring ready to release. I whispered, almost to myself, "We're going to stop her. Somehow we'll make this right." William nodded, a quiet affirmation in his sad, steady eyes, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could. The days that followed were a blur of whispered strategy, flickering library lights, and the low hum of computers as William and I settled into a rhythm that felt almost like a lifeline. We became investigative partners almost by necessity, two displaced souls clinging to each other in the fragile pursuit of truth. The public library became our sanctuary, its rows of books and the quiet clatter of keyboards offering a strange sense of normalcy amidst the storm of betrayal that had consumed my life. We would arrive early, sit side by side at one of the long wooden tables, and immerse ourselves in research, statutes, legal precedents, and guides about elder rights and protections. William's knowledge was encyclopedic, precise, and delivered with a patience that made me feel less like a frantic, frightened mother and more like a competent woman reclaiming agency over her life. Even as I pored over the law, the personal betrayals continued to sting. I began to learn, through whispered conversations from neighbors and friends, that Claire had been spreading rumors about me. Whispers of senile and paranoid clung to my name like shadows, insidious and persistent, laying the groundwork for a narrative meant to declare me incompetent. I felt my chest tighten with every story I heard, every friend who hesitated or recoiled slightly when I mentioned my name. The sting of betrayal cut deeper when the phone rang one evening, and I recognized my sister Margaret's voice. "Claire says you're having delusions, Teresa. Maybe you should see a doctor." I clutched the phone like a lifeline, my knuckles whitening. My own sister, my family, was turning against me because of lies, whispers, and manipulation that had no place in the life we had shared. The familiar ache of loneliness that I thought I had escaped returned, but this time it was tempered by William's steady presence beside me. He squeezed my hand gently. "Document everything," he whispered, and in those 2 words lay the wisdom of someone who had survived ruin and betrayal himself. William taught me how to meticulously record our findings: photos of discarded receipts, scanned copies of documents, timestamps, and audio recordings. I received my first burner phone, a small device that felt both foreign and liberating in my hand. I began recording conversations with Claire when she called to check on me, every word a thread of evidence I could use to protect myself. One call was particularly revealing. Claire's voice, smooth and deceptively sweet, slipped just enough for me to catch her true intent. "Mom, just sign the trust revision. It's for your own good. You're not getting any younger." The casual cruelty in her words made my hands tremble, but the recording provided a strange comfort, a proof that I was not imagining the danger I was in. By day, William worked odd jobs, repairing electronics or doing carpentry, always returning with a quiet humility that belied the brilliance of his mind. By night, he became the investigator I could only dream of being. Using his forensic accounting expertise, he traced Claire's financial movements, mapping out a pattern of reckless spending, failed ventures, and secret debts. It was staggering. She owed over $300,000, a tangle of loans, failed business investments, and gambling losses that left her scrambling for ways to maintain the illusion of control. One evening, as we pored over yet another spreadsheet detailing transfers, debts, and dubious transactions, he looked at me with an intensity that made my chest ache. "Your inheritance isn't greed, Teresa," he said gently, his voice carrying both warning and compassion. "It's desperation, which makes her even more dangerous." I felt the weight of his words settle into my bones, a combination of fear and resolve. This was no longer just a fight over money. It was about survival, about reclaiming my dignity and protecting the life I had fought to preserve. The bond between us deepened with each revelation, each quiet night spent strategizing over dim library lights, and each whispered plan under the watchful eyes of a city that seemed oblivious to the storm brewing beneath its surface. I began to notice small changes in myself. The way I held my head a little higher, the way my voice carried more confidence when I spoke to William or recounted my findings. He would notice and smile faintly, as if proud of the fragile courage growing inside me. "You're stronger than you know," he would murmur when I doubted myself, and in his voice was the echo of someone who had endured his own ruin and found the strength to rise again. There were moments of despair, of course. Nights when I lay awake in the dim light of the shelter, listening to the rain tapping against the cardboard walls, wondering if this path would ever lead to justice, if I would ever see Claire for who she truly was, and reclaim the life she had tried to dismantle. But William's unwavering presence, the meticulous way he guided me through the maze of deceit, and the growing stack of documents and recordings became a tangible symbol of hope. Each piece of evidence was a small victory, a whisper of validation that I had not been imagining the betrayal, that I was not powerless. By the time weeks had passed, the pattern of Claire's deception was clear. Each new document, each audio recording, each calculated observation painted a vivid portrait of a daughter willing to dismantle her own mother's life for personal gain. And yet, within the growing darkness of that truth, I began to see a glimmer of possibility, an understanding that, together, William and I could confront this. That hope, fragile as it was, fueled the courage that had seemed lost when I first sat outside Claire's house in the rain, a mother invisible in the shadow of her own family. One quiet night, as we reviewed the final spreadsheet for the evening, William placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're ready for what comes next," he said softly, his eyes reflecting the same steadfast resolve I felt stirring within me. "Not because it will be easy, but because you've already survived the worst. You've already endured betrayal, fear, and isolation. Now it's time to fight back." And in that moment, I realized something profound. I was no longer simply a victim. I was a woman reclaiming her power, learning to navigate a world that had once seemed determined to discard me. And though the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, danger, and heartbreak, I knew I would not walk it alone. William was by my side, a steadfast ally and friend, and together we would begin the long, painstaking work of building the case that would reclaim not just my inheritance, but my life, my dignity, and my sense of purpose. The decision to visit Claire unannounced came with a pulse of fear I could not ignore. My stomach knotted as I walked up the familiar path to her house, the autumn air crisp and sharp against my face. William had outfitted me with a small recording wire, its presence beneath my blouse both comforting and terrifying, a lifeline in case I faltered in front of the daughter I had once trusted more than anyone. I gripped my handbag tightly, the strap digging into my hand as I rang the doorbell, heart hammering, mind racing. Claire answered quickly, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. "Mom?" she said cautiously, masking surprise with a polite tension. I forced a small, uncertain smile, my voice wavering just enough to play the part of the confused elderly mother I was pretending to be. "Hello, dear," I began, my tone soft and deliberate. I was wondering about that paperwork you mentioned. I don't understand it very well. Could you explain it to me?" Her eyes flickered with irritation almost immediately. "Mom, you're so frustrating," she snapped, her voice sharp and controlled. "Just sign what I send you and stop asking questions." I tilted my head slightly, maintaining my act, letting the anxiety and feigned confusion lace my voice. "But I want to understand. Robert's estate. It's so much, and I'm worried I might make a mistake." My hands fidgeted nervously, fingers brushing over the hem of the wire concealed beneath my blouse. Claire's patience cracked. Her face reddened, and the polite mask she had worn for so long began to crumble. "Dad left everything to you, and you don't even appreciate it. You don't need all that money." Her voice shook now, not with fear, but with the raw, exposed desperation of someone unmasked, someone who had believed they could manipulate me without consequence. I pressed further, careful to keep my tone gentle but insistent. "But what about the documents you asked me to sign? I need to understand them fully. It's my life too, isn't it?" And then it happened. Her facade shattered completely. Her eyes, once warm and familiar, hardened into something unrecognizable. "You're going to die soon anyway," she spat, venom curling in her words. "Why make this difficult?" The cruelty in her voice, the complete absence of the daughter I had known, made my chest tighten in a familiar ache of betrayal. Yet through the fear, a surge of clarity washed over me. Every word she had spoken, every slip of frustration and contempt was being captured, proof of her intentions that could not be denied. I left her house shaking, my hands trembling, but beneath the tremor was a fierce, triumphant energy. I had her confession, unfiltered, undeniable. As I walked back to the bridge, the rain had returned, light and cold, washing over my coat, my hair, but I no longer felt invisible. I had a weapon far more potent than anger: truth. When I returned to William, we sat on the damp concrete under the bridge, sharing a cheap pizza from a corner store. He smiled at me, a full, genuine smile that I had never seen since our first encounter. It was a sight that warmed the chill of the evening, a momentary triumph in a world that had threatened to swallow us both. "You know what we need?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with a quiet fire. "We need to become people she can't ignore." His confidence, long buried beneath years of hardship and betrayal, returned in that instant, filling the space between us with a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. That night, as the city slept and the rain pattered softly against the bridge supports, William revealed his plan in careful, deliberate words. "I know how to rebuild fortunes, Teresa," he said quietly, the tone of a man who had once walked through fire and emerged stronger. "I did it once. I can do it again. But this time, we do it together." We shook hands, two discarded people bound by shared pain and newly found trust, a pact forged in quiet determination. The weight of our alliance was heavy, yet comforting, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of real partnership, an understanding that we would face the coming storm not as victims, but as architects of our own redemption. Neither of us knew, of course, that a pair of sharp eyes across the street had been silently documenting our meeting. Claire had hired an investigator, a silent witness to the quiet rebellion of two people the world had written off. But in that moment, under the bridge, sharing the warmth of pizza and the first real smiles we had exchanged in months, neither William nor I cared. We had begun to reclaim our power, one small victory at a time, and the knowledge of danger only strengthened the bond between us. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future not dictated by fear and betrayal, but by resilience and strategy. The path ahead would be treacherous, fraught with challenges I could not yet foresee, yet I felt the fragile thrill of hope fluttering in my chest. We were no longer powerless, no longer invisible. We had begun our counterattack, and nothing, not threats, not deceit, not even the shadows of the past, would stop us from reclaiming the life that had almost been stolen. As the night deepened and the city lay quiet, William and I sat together under the bridge, our shoulders touching slightly in a shared warmth that neither of us had expected. For the first time since the storm had begun, I felt that perhaps, through trust, persistence, and the courage to face what was hidden, redemption was possible, not just for me, but for both of us. The air felt different the day William and I opened our small consulting office. The scent of fresh paint and the faint tang of coffee from a corner machine filled the modest space. But more than that, there was a sense of purpose that hadn't existed in our lives for months. Using the last of my savings and William's unparalleled expertise, we had built something tangible from the chaos that had once threatened to swallow us. We were no longer merely surviving. We were creating a sanctuary for those who, like me, had been ignored, manipulated, and left vulnerable. Our first client arrived hesitantly, a fragile woman named Eleanor, whose hands trembled as she clutched a worn handbag. Her eyes darted around the office, wary and uncertain, as though expecting the world to deceive her at any moment. William guided me with a quiet nod. "Let her speak first," he whispered. Eleanor's story poured out in broken sentences. Her son had been siphoning funds from her pension, slowly and deliberately, while she believed she was simply helping him manage bills. The betrayal was subtle but relentless, and I felt a deep ache for her, a mirror of the fear and confusion I had lived through months ago. As William analyzed her accounts, his fingers flying across the keyboard, I sat close, offering reassurance, holding her gaze, and letting her know she was not alone. Within days, William uncovered the truth, the precise movement of funds, the hidden accounts, the quiet theft that had left her feeling powerless. The relief on Eleanor's face, the soft, almost tearful gratitude in her voice, gave me a sense of meaning I had not known I'd been missing. Word of our work spread quickly through community centers and senior groups. One by one, elderly individuals came to us, each with their own story of subtle manipulation, financial deception, or outright betrayal. 10 clients became 20, and with each new person, I discovered an unexpected gift: the ability to connect, to truly see the fear in someone's eyes and translate it into reassurance, empathy, and trust. It was as if the months of isolation and betrayal I had endured had prepared me for this exact role, shaping me into someone capable of transforming fear into empowerment. While I listened, counseled, and built trust, William handled the technical intricacies with a quiet brilliance. He mapped financial trails, deciphered complex legal documents, and exposed deceit with a precision that left both clients and me in awe. Together, we became a seamless team. His mind for logic, mine for heart, each complementing the other in ways that deepened our partnership beyond words. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of victories, late nights, and countless small moments of triumph. The bridge where we had once shared pizza became a distant memory as we moved into a small office space, then a modest apartment we shared platonically, its walls filled with the warmth of our purpose rather than the cold shadows of past despair. For the first time in months, I slept without the lingering dread of betrayal pressing down on me. Occasionally, Claire called. Her voice, smooth and falsely sweet, dripped with concern that was anything but genuine. "Mom, people tell me you're living with some homeless man. Are you being scammed?" she asked, the words laced with calculated suspicion. I allowed myself a small, secret smile. "I'm fine, Claire. Better than fine, actually," I said softly, enjoying the pause, the hesitation that fell across the phone line as confusion replaced the composure she tried so hard to maintain. There was power in that silence, in the subtle realization that her attempts to intimidate me no longer held sway. Our business continued to grow, steadily, almost organically. We hired 2 employees, then 5, then 10. Each new addition brought more knowledge, more energy, and more opportunities to protect the vulnerable from the same type of exploitation I had endured. William's confidence, once buried beneath years of hardship and the shadow of false accusations, flourished alongside mine. We were no longer merely reacting to threats. We were shaping a force capable of creating meaningful change. One evening, William presented me with a set of partnership papers. His eyes held the rare intensity of someone fully alive, fully seen, and completely invested. "Equal partners in everything, Teresa," he said quietly, the weight of those words resting heavily in the room. "You gave me back my purpose." I hugged him in gratitude, a long, heartfelt embrace that carried the memory of every night we had spent under the bridge, every fear shared, every step forward we had taken together. And yet, even in that moment of triumph, my eyes caught a movement outside the office window. Across the street, a man with a camera focused intently on us, clicking away with deliberate precision. My stomach sank. For a moment, the triumph and hope we had cultivated felt fragile, like a thin glass teetering on the edge of a counter. Someone was watching, documenting, analyzing, and perhaps ready to use what they saw to undermine the fragile victory we had earned. But as I looked back at William, standing tall and resolute beside me, the worry eased slightly. We had faced betrayal before, yes, but we had also learned how to endure, to fight, and to rise from the ashes stronger than we had been before. That night, as we closed the office and walked to our apartment, the city lights casting soft reflections on the rain-slicked streets, I felt a quiet, determined optimism settle into my chest. We had started from nothing, 2 discarded people, abandoned and unseen, and built something that mattered, something alive. The work we had done, the trust we had earned, the lives we had protected, it all meant more than any inheritance, any wealth, any validation from the world outside. For the first time, I truly understood that rising from the ashes wasn't merely about survival. It was about transformation, about turning pain into purpose, fear into courage, and isolation into connection. And in William, I had found not just a partner in this fight, but a companion in resilience, a reminder that even when the world discards you, there is always the possibility to reclaim your life, your dignity, and your hope. As we prepared for the days ahead, I felt a quiet, unwavering certainty. Our work was far from over. The challenges yet to come were vast, but we were ready. Together, we were no longer just survivors. We were architects of change, a living testament to the strength that could be found in compassion, trust, and the courage to rebuild when everything had been stripped away. The morning the legal papers arrived, my hands shook before I even touched them. Claire had escalated her game, filing a claim that I was mentally incompetent and that William, my steadfast ally, was nothing more than a known con artist exploiting me. I felt the familiar pang of fear, the creeping cold of betrayal pressing into my chest, but this time it was sharpened by disbelief and anger. Her words were precise, cruel, and calculated, just as I had begun to suspect. They painted William and me as a dangerous anomaly, a story of vulnerability manipulated for personal gain. The documents included photos of William and me, images of our office, our modest apartment, our shared smiles, all presented in a way that twisted our companionship into a narrative of isolation and control. Claire claimed he had cut me off from family, that I was alone and dependent, that I could not make decisions for myself. It was an insidious strategy, the kind of thing I had never imagined my own daughter would craft with such methodical cruelty. My chest tightened, my throat dry as I read each line, realizing the depth of deception I now faced. A few days later, a court-appointed evaluator came to meet with me. The woman's expression was polite but impartial, her eyes scanning for evidence of confusion, dementia, or incapacity. She asked questions that seemed innocuous on the surface, but I recognized the subtle trap. Every word, every hesitation could be interpreted as weakness, as proof that Claire's narrative of my incompetence was true. "Mrs. Martinez," she began, her voice calm but clinical, "do you understand that Mr. William Harrison was convicted of embezzlement?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart stopped. William had never mentioned a conviction, not once. Not the kind of truth that could upend everything we had worked for, everything we had built together. My hands clenched in my lap, knuckles whitening, as a storm of fear and disbelief surged through me. That night, I confronted William in the quiet of our apartment. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old books, the dim light casting long shadows across his worn but steady face. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the weight of a secret finally surfacing. Teresa, I need to tell you something," he began, voice trembling. "I took a plea deal because I couldn't afford to fight. I'm not a con artist, Teresa, but legally, I'm a convicted felon." The revelation struck me hard. The foundation of trust we had built, the bond that had carried me through months of fear and uncertainty, shook. I felt a swirl of emotions, fear for our safety, anger at the deception, sadness that William had borne this burden alone, and a piercing loyalty that refused to waver. For a long moment, the room was silent. I looked at him, at the man who had saved me from the depths of despair, who had believed in me when the world had turned its back. I thought of every time I had been abandoned, left in the rain, dismissed, ignored. I thought of the courage I had drawn from my own survival and from the bond we had nurtured in the shadows of betrayal. Then I spoke, my voice firm and unwavering. "We fight together," I said, letting the weight of each word settle in the quiet room. "I don't abandon people I love. Not now, not ever." William's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe, and he nodded, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. For a brief moment, I saw the man who had once been crushed by false accusations and abandonment, now standing beside me, ready to face whatever came next. Using the profits from our burgeoning consulting business, we hired a lawyer, Patricia Chen, a sharp, uncompromising advocate specializing in elder abuse cases. The day she walked into our office, her presence commanded attention. She carried herself with quiet authority, her eyes scanning the room with analytical precision, noting the stacks of documents, photographs, and financial statements that testified to the meticulous work we had done. Patricia pored over every detail, every shred of evidence William and I had painstakingly collected. As she worked, I watched her expression shift from professional detachment to a subtle, almost imperceptible smile. "Claire made one critical mistake," she said finally, her voice crisp, tinged with satisfaction. "She documented her plans digitally, Teresa, and I know how to get court orders for electronic discovery. Every email, every bank transfer, every call, if we dig deep, it will all be revealed." I felt a cautious spark of hope ignite within me, tempered by the understanding that the battle ahead would be brutal. Patricia's next words were colder, sharper, a reminder of the storm we were stepping into. "But Teresa, you need to be ready. This gets ugly before it gets better." The weight of her words settled in the room like a storm cloud. I could see the path ahead, lined with legal maneuvering, deception, and confrontation. Yet for the first time, I did not feel powerless. I felt prepared. I had William by my side, a man whose brilliance and determination were matched only by his integrity. I had Patricia, a legal mind sharp enough to cut through the layers of lies that Claire had woven. And I had myself, someone who had survived betrayal, humiliation, and abandonment, and who had emerged stronger, wiser, and resolute. As I sat in our office that evening, reviewing the stack of documents with William and Patricia, I realized that fear no longer dictated my actions. The rain of betrayal that had once left me shivering on a curb had been replaced by a clear, focused determination. We were no longer victims. We were architects of justice, poised to turn the tables on the daughter who had underestimated the resilience of a mother who had refused to disappear. The nights ahead would be long, filled with interrogations, legal strategy, and the careful unraveling of a web Claire had spun so confidently. But as I looked at William, his eyes steady and unwavering, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, we would navigate the treacherous waters, guided by truth, loyalty, and the fierce knowledge that some bonds, those forged in shared pain and unwavering trust, could not be broken. That night, as the city's lights flickered against the darkened sky outside our office window, I allowed myself a quiet, determined thought. No matter how ugly the battle became, no matter the lies, the manipulation, or the threats, we would rise. And when the dust settled, we would stand not only victorious, but unbroken, proof that courage, love, and steadfast loyalty could withstand even the most calculated cruelty. The day Patricia delivered the subpoenas felt surreal, almost unreal, as if the truth we had uncovered was too heavy for daylight. She had moved with precision, obtaining court authorization to access Claire's emails, bank records, and phone logs under the competency hearing process. It was a quiet, meticulous invasion of my daughter's carefully constructed facade, and as I watched Patricia organize the stacks of digital evidence, I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation swirling inside me. Each file we opened, each encrypted email we decrypted, revealed another layer of betrayal I could never have imagined. The reality was far worse than we had feared. Claire's plan extended far beyond greed or desperation. She hadn't merely intended to siphon my inheritance, she had orchestrated a campaign to destabilize me physically and mentally. Medical records, obtained through Patricia's relentless efforts, showed a pattern of deception that chilled me to my core. Claire had been systematically poisoning my meals during our weekly visits, slipping small amounts of sedatives into my tea, my soup, my water. The doses were subtle, almost imperceptible, enough to create evidence of mental decline, feeding the narrative she had been carefully constructing for months. I remember sitting in our office, my hands pressed to my mouth as I read the toxicology reports, trying to reconcile the image of the daughter I once loved with the calculated cruelty these documents revealed. My body shook, not from fear alone, but from the profound violation of trust. I had shared my life, my home, my heart, with someone who had chosen destruction over love, manipulation over empathy. And yet, beneath the horror, a steely resolve began to form, a quiet determination to ensure that the darkness she had attempted to spread could never touch anyone else. Patricia's findings grew more damning as she cross-referenced my doctor's notes with phone call logs. Claire had been calling, reporting false symptoms, inventing complaints, convincing medical professionals to assess me for dementia. Each call, each fabricated story, was a brick in the wall she had tried to build between me and my own mind. And yet, through it all, I had survived. I had navigated the fog of her manipulation with the guidance of William and the meticulous strategy we had forged together. Speaking of William, his discovery sent another shock through the room. While tracing Claire's financial maneuvers and digital footprints, he uncovered a connection to his old business partner, Marcus Thornton. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. Marcus, the man who had betrayed William years ago, had been working in tandem with my own daughter. Marcus helped Claire create this plan, William said, his voice unsteady, tinged with disbelief and anger. He's been using her to test schemes he can replicate with other wealthy elderly people. The weight of the realization was staggering. This was no longer about inheritance or family greed. It was an organized network, a systemic campaign of elder financial abuse stretching far beyond my own story. I could feel the enormity pressing against my chest, a mixture of outrage and helplessness that clawed at my throat. Patricia, ever the calm strategist, immediately began contacting federal authorities. "This is now a federal case," she informed us, her tone sharp with focus. The words were both a relief and a reminder that the fight ahead was going to escalate to levels none of us had imagined. Claire, sensing the tightening net around her, responded with desperation. She attempted to turn the tables, claiming that William had been physically abusing me. False police reports, manipulated medical photos, coached witnesses, every trick she could summon, every sliver of deceit she could fabricate, she employed without hesitation. It was exhausting, infuriating, and terrifying. For a moment, I felt the edges of panic nibbling at my resolve, the memories of betrayal and abandonment threatening to overwhelm me once again. But William, ever steady even in the face of revelation, placed his hand over mine, his eyes locking with mine in quiet reassurance. "You're the strongest person I know, Teresa," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You survived being thrown out in the rain. You can survive this." His words, simple and unwavering, reminded me of the courage that had carried me through months of fear and isolation. They anchored me, reminding me that strength was not the absence of fear, but the persistence to act in spite of it. Then came Patricia's bombshell. We sat together in our small office, the city lights casting long reflections on the glass, and she leaned in, her voice low but commanding. "The FBI wants you both to go undercover. They want to catch the entire network, but it means playing victim one more time. Can you do it?" The request hit me in layers, fear, doubt, and the weight of moral responsibility crashing together. The idea of returning to a role of vulnerability, of pretending to be fragile again, seemed unbearable at first. But then I looked at William, whose gaze met mine with a mix of trust, respect, and quiet expectation. I thought of the lives that depended on us, the elderly people we had already helped, the countless others still at risk, unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows of their own families. "Yes," I said finally, my voice steady, carrying a newfound clarity. "We'll do it. For them. For the people who have no one else to fight for them." William's expression softened, a mixture of relief and admiration. He squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement that together we were more than capable of facing this final, perilous phase. The challenge ahead was immense, fraught with deception, danger, and the heavy emotional toll of returning to a role that reminded us of our own vulnerability. Yet beneath it all, there was an unspoken certainty. We were prepared to endure, to persevere, and to ensure that justice, not fear or manipulation, would prevail. As I left the office that evening, the cool breeze brushing against my face, I felt a renewed determination. The path ahead would be treacherous, the emotional toll considerable, and the stakes higher than ever before. But I had survived abandonment, betrayal, and near despair. I had learned to trust in William, in Patricia, and most importantly, in my own strength. And as the city lights glimmered like distant stars, I allowed myself a small, defiant smile. We would rise once again, not merely as survivors, but as a force of purpose and justice. We would expose the darkness hidden behind smiles and polite facades. We would protect the vulnerable. And when it was over, the truth would shine, undeniable and unwavering, a testament to resilience, courage, and the unbreakable bonds forged in shared struggle. I remember the first night I agreed to go undercover like it was a bruise, raw and close to the surface. Patricia sat across from me, her face a study in controlled intensity, and explained the plan in the kind, clinical way of someone who had seen too many broken things rebuilt. The FBI would outfit me with recording devices, hide cameras where necessary, and have an agent nearby. I would pretend to reconcile with Claire, to be the doting, confused mother she preferred in front of others. The thought of pretending weakness again made my skin crawl, but beneath the nausea, there was a steadiness I hadn't expected, a purpose that blurred the edges of fear. This was not for me alone. It was for the nameless faces of the elderly who had no one to fight for them. It was for the way William had believed me when no one else had. So I clung to that when the doubts swelled. On the evening of the first family dinner, I dressed carefully, choosing a soft blouse that made me feel both respectable and unremarkable. Exactly the disguise the plan demanded. Patricia and an FBI tech tucked a tiny recorder into the pendant that hung against my sternum, its weight a cold, reassuring presence. William kissed my forehead before I left, his fingers lingering as if to transfer courage. "You can do this," he murmured. "You're braver than you think." His eyes were steady, mine were not. I left with my hands trembling, but my steps sure. Sitting at Claire's table was agony wrapped in civility. The house smelled of roasted rosemary and the faint citrus of candles, subtle comforts meant to soothe, to lower my guard. Claire moved around the room with practiced ease, the hostess everyone admired, offering me a cup of tea with a smile that did not reach her eyes. When she poured, I felt nothing. I was performed calm, an actress with precise lines. Inside, my stomach recoiled. I knew she had done this 100 ways before, small doses, clever concealment, enough to blur cognition, but not enough to kill outright. Patricia had coached me on expression, on cadence. The FBI had switched my drink beforehand. Still, watching Claire bend toward my cup, the movement so casual it might have been tender, while she slipped something into the tea when she thought I wasn't looking, felt like watching a hand tighten a noose in slow motion. "You're doing so much better, Mom," Claire said, her voice silk. Marcus Thornton sat across the table, his presence like a shadow that never quite sat where it belonged. He watched me with an appraising, almost clinical interest, the kind a man who studies people for profit uses. "Maybe you were right to cut off that homeless man," Claire added, the barb wrapped in faux concern. The words landed with the dull thud of a stone. My throat tightened, my hands stayed folded in my lap. I smiled in the way Patricia had taught me, light, grateful, small. Playing confused and grateful felt like walking on broken glass, painful but precise. I let my eyes cloud with a practiced uncertainty, let my smile quiver at the edges, and leaned into the role Patricia had mapped out for me. Vulnerable, fond, slightly forgetful. Every gesture and sigh had to be believable. Every pause had to be just long enough to invite their cruelty and not betray the wire in my chest. William monitored everything from a safe distance, his texts a lifeline that buzzed in the small, private way only he and I shared. "You're incredible." "Almost there," one message read, and with it came a warmth that steadied my trembling. In the small, private world of our signals, there was intimacy and faith, and each short line of encouragement was a tether to reality when the scene at the table threatened to drown me in its artifice. Week after week, I returned to that table, each dinner a surgical exercise in controlled vulnerability. Over several weeks, the recordings accumulated, silent witnesses to conversations that would have sounded like polite dinner chatter to anyone else. But when played back under the clinical ear of investigators, the truth emerged like a map where every dotted line led to violence. Claire and Marcus spoke as if rehearsing a lecture, the cadence of their planning untroubled by moral language. I listened, holding back bile as they articulated sinister logistics, ways to identify wealthy targets, methods to isolate them, techniques to create plausible declines that would be accepted by doctors and families alike. It was clinical, horrifying, and precise. They spoke of tests, small sedations here, confusing introductions there, always calculated to manufacture a believable story of decline. Marcus, with the ease of a man who had practiced cruelty until it felt like engineering, discussed the numbers with a detached kind of pride. I heard them name towns, bank types, even attorneys who would play along if paid well enough. When the recordings were played back later, the pattern was undeniable. 17 victims across 3 states, each case following a similar arc of theft and deception. I held this number in my chest like a stone, heavier than any single betrayal, because it made the crime systemic, professional, a machine designed to prey on the trusting and the lonely. The final recording happened on a night they thought I would be too medicated to remember. I remember the way the light in Claire's dining room pooled in an amber puddle across the tablecloth, the clink of cutlery like a calm before some greater storm. They spoke openly, confident their scheme would proceed. Marcus laughed, a sharp sound that scraped into my bones. "Your mother's the perfect case study, Claire. Trusting, generous, completely naive," he said, and his laugh had the casual cruelty of a man reviewing a profitable experiment. Claire answered, almost bored. "She made it easy. She always sees the best in people. It's pathetic, really." Those words, so small, so casual, were like a blade sliding between ribs. Hearing my daughter reduce my lifelong empathy to a weakness, watchable and exploitable, broke something in me. For a moment, I wanted to leap up, to scream, to let my heart be heard in its rawness. But the device against my chest thudded softly, and I breathed out instead, letting the recorded proof collect like sunlight in a jar. I touched the pendant invisibly tucked beneath my blouse, feeling the hard metallic curve of the recorder. A small smile ghosted my face, not of triumph, but of a hard, clear resolution. "You're right, Claire," I thought, savoring the quiet irony, the truth that had been prepared in someone else's arrogance. "I do see the best in people. That's why I know exactly how to destroy the worst." It was not a desire for revenge in the petty sense. It was the steady, righteous unmaking of a system built on cruelty. After the meeting, as if nothing had happened, Claire pulled me into a hug that smelled faintly of her perfume and something I could not name, sweat maybe, or the nervous undercurrent of guilt. Her whisper was soft in my ear. "Soon, Mom, very soon, you'll be at peace." She meant it as comfort, a promise that the scheme would end my struggle. I felt the hug tighten, felt her breath warm against my neck, and for an instant I allowed the old motherly reflex to surface. Then I stepped back and hugged her in return, a careful, practiced gesture that matched our choreography. "Yes, dear," I whispered, the words small, soft, and deliberate. "Very soon, everything will be revealed." My voice was steady. Inside, something large and slow shifted, a packing up of sorrow into purpose, a reclamation of rage into the cool light of proof. I left her house that night, holding a calm I had not known I possessed. The recordings would be enough. The evidence would be undeniable. The trap that had been sprung to rob and erase us would unravel under the weight of its own arrogance. As I walked home, the city's air tasted of rain and gasoline and possibility. William's text arrived, a single word, home, and then, after a breath, "You did it," I typed back, fingers steady, and felt the arc of our journey sharpen into something close to hope. We had pretended to be victims for the sake of truth, and through the charade, we had unearthed a darkness more vast than either of us had imagined. The cost had been intimate, watching my daughter reveal herself in the worst possible light. But the result would be wider than my personal heartbreak. It would be protection for others, a quiet revolution born of careful courage. That night, in our small apartment, I slept with the pendant warm against my skin, proof pressed close to my heart. I dreamed of light breaking through a long, long winter. When morning came, the weight on my chest felt different, lighter, as if the air itself had shifted. We had done the hard, terrible work. Now the law would move, and soon, very soon, those 17 names would not be just numbers anymore. They would be voices heard, wrongs acknowledged, lives restored. And when that came, I would stand with William and Patricia and the stubborn small band of people who refused to forget, and we would see justice done. I remember the day the FBI struck, as if the sky itself had opened and poured clarity over a long, dark chapter of my life. Early in the morning, the faint light of Portland's drizzle barely lit the streets when I heard the commotion outside. Shouts, the sharp crack of boots against pavement, the metallic click of handcuffs. Sounds that would haunt a normal day but, for me, were the long-awaited music of justice arriving. Federal agents moved with purpose, precision. They arrested Claire, Marcus, and 4 others in coordinated raids across the city. The efficiency and decisiveness were almost beautiful in their stark contrast to the months of secrecy, deceit, and fear I had endured. The evidence they brought with them was overwhelming. Meticulously organized documents, recordings that captured every nuance of conversation, financial trails leading from accounts I never knew existed, and testimonies from families who had been silenced too long. I watched from the safety of my apartment window as Claire and Marcus were led away, the weight of their arrogance finally undone by the careful, patient work William, Patricia, and I had set into motion. And through it all, I felt a strange, fluttering relief that was almost foreign after so many months of betrayal and doubt. By midday, local news began to broadcast the story. I watched the headlines scroll across the screen. Massive elder abuse network uncovered by 67-year-old victim and her homeless friend. I blinked at it, unable at first to absorb the reality. There we were, William and I, 2 discarded people the world had overlooked, now heralded for unmasking a network that preyed on the vulnerable. I felt a rush of humility mixed with pride, the kind that settles deep in your chest, heavy but warm, as if the universe had briefly acknowledged your suffering and hard-won courage. My phone exploded with messages and calls from family members who had once believed Claire's lies about me. I picked up Margaret's trembling voice first. "Teresa," she cried, her words choking on grief and guilt. "I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you." I held the phone to my ear, listening to the crackle of her tears, and I realized that anger took too much energy. I had spent too long fighting not just for survival, but against imagined slights and imagined apathy. I forgave her, not because I had to, but because forgiveness was the only way forward. "It's okay, Margaret," I said softly. "Let's just move forward now. That's what matters." And even through the phone, I could feel the tremor of relief and grief mingling on the other end. In the following weeks, William and I were interviewed by police, the FBI, and eventually media outlets clamoring for our story. Sitting in conference rooms under harsh fluorescent lights or the soft, diffused glow of news cameras, I recounted the events from the rainy night I met William to the painstaking documentation and recordings that had exposed Claire and Marcus. I tried to convey not just the facts, but the emotional weight of every betrayal and act of courage. William sat beside me quietly, his hands folded, a steady presence that reminded me of the first night we shared a blanket under the bridge. He was no longer the man cast aside by society. He was my partner, my friend, my equal in this journey. I noticed small smiles from journalists, gentle nods of understanding, and even the occasional sniffle from someone moved by our story. We weren't just telling a tale of crime and deception. We were telling a tale of survival, of redemption, of the quiet strength of those who refuse to be invisible. The aftermath was extraordinary. Requests for our consulting business poured in from every corner of the state. Elderly people and their families called frantically, seeking guidance, protection, and reassurance. Our small office, once modest, transformed rapidly. We hired former investigators who had lost faith in bureaucracy, social workers who understood the quiet heartbreak of neglect, and legal experts who could untangle the labyrinthine schemes that exploited the elderly. Each new client was a reminder of why we had endured, a confirmation that the painstaking weeks of surveillance, courage, and deception had a purpose far larger than ourselves. In 6 months, we had helped recover over $4 million in stolen assets, giving these individuals not just financial security, but dignity and hope. A personal victory came when William was officially exonerated. Evidence proving that Marcus Thornton had framed him years ago was finally brought to light. I watched him read the court documents, his eyes wide, and then, for the first time since I met him, he laughed freely, unguarded. "We did it," he said one evening in our now professional office suite, his voice thick with emotion. "We built something good from something terrible." I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sadness, but of relief and awe at what we had accomplished. We were no longer castaways. We were builders, protectors, and witnesses to the triumph of diligence and courage over cruelty. Then came a call from Patricia, sharp and precise as always. "The trial date is set, and Teresa, Claire wants to make a deal. She'll testify against the others if you agree to lighter sentencing." I let the silence stretch, absorbing the implications. Justice had a timetable, and morality had its own ledger. Finally, I said, "Tell her I'll consider it after I have my day in court." Patricia paused and then added, "There's something else. A major network wants to do a special on your story. It would air the week of the trial. Interested?" I felt the pulse of history in that moment, the chance to amplify not just my story, but the voices of countless others who had been silenced. I thought of the people we had helped, the lives we had touched, the courage we had nurtured, and I felt a quiet, grounded pride. "Yes," I said softly, almost reverently. "Yes, we'll do it." As I hung up the phone, I looked around our office. The desks were filled with files, phones rang with inquiries, and the soft hum of computers was a soundtrack of purpose. William, at his station, looked up and caught my eye. We shared a brief smile, one that encompassed every hardship, every betrayal, and every triumph. The office, the work, the people, it was all tangible proof that even from the deepest betrayals and darkest nights, growth, healing, and justice could bloom. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the past months settle, and felt an unfamiliar but deeply deserved sense of peace. Justice had arrived, not just for me, but for everyone we had fought to protect. I stand backstage at the National Morning Show, feeling a mixture of nerves and calm I've never known before. My navy suit fits perfectly, tailored just enough to convey authority without arrogance, and my silver hair is styled with quiet elegance that frames my face and softens the lines left by worry and tears. Today, I am not the woman who sat in the rain 18 months ago, shivering, abandoned, and invisible. I am alive. I am seen. I am powerful in a way that has nothing to do with wealth or recognition. This power comes from surviving, from fighting, and from building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. William stands quietly in the wings, refusing to appear on camera. I feel a pang of gratitude for his presence. He never seeks credit, never asks for accolades. He simply waits, ready to support. "This is your moment, Teresa," he whispers. His eyes, steady and warm, remind me of the nights under the bridge when all we had was hope, determination, and each other. I take a deep breath and step forward when the producer signals me, the studio lights warm on my face, the cameras rolling, the nation waiting to hear my story. The interview begins. I speak candidly, openly, as Patricia coached me, but with the raw emotion that cannot be coached. I tell them about the rain that soaked my clothes and my spirit, about the nights I slept with uncertainty gnawing at my chest, about the betrayal of a daughter I had loved more than life itself. I describe the painstaking process of uncovering the truth, William's tireless help, the documents, the recordings, and the bravery of every stranger who chose to help rather than look away. I explain how the justice system sometimes fails the vulnerable, and how kindness from those willing to risk everything can turn despair into hope. I see the host nod, the cameras capturing every moment, the millions of viewers hearing, perhaps for the first time, the depth of what elder abuse truly looks like, and the courage it takes to fight it. The host asks the question I had been dreading, yet preparing for my entire life. "What would you say to your daughter now?" I pause, letting the silence stretch long enough for the weight of the words to settle. I want to convey both grief and resolution. Finally, I speak. "I'd say I'm sorry I couldn't save you from your own darkness, Claire. I'm sorry my love wasn't enough, but I won't apologize for surviving you, or for building something beautiful from your cruelty." I watch the subtle reactions of the crew and audience. The silence feels reverent, as though they understand that my statement is more than words. It is a life reclaimed. During the commercial break, Patricia texts me, "Verdict is in, guilty on all counts." My chest tightens, but it is not anxiety this time, it is relief. When we return to air, I share the news. Claire and Marcus each receive 15-year sentences. The studio audience stands and applauds, but I feel an unexpected emptiness, a reminder that justice, while necessary, cannot fill the spaces where trust and love once lived. I carry that emptiness with a quiet acceptance. It reminds me of what I have endured and what I have overcome. After the show, I walk to a nearby park where William waits with 2 steaming cups of coffee. The air smells faintly of wet leaves and earth, grounding me in a simplicity I cherish after months of chaos. "Do you feel vindicated?" he asks gently, as though he knows the complexity of my emotions cannot be captured in a single word. I shake my head, letting a small smile tug at my lips. "I feel free," I say honestly, "and grateful. You gave me shelter when I had nothing, William. You saw me when I was invisible." He smiles back, a soft, sincere smile that carries all the weight of shared hardship and triumph. "You gave me back my life, Teresa. You believed in me when the world called me a criminal. There is an unspoken understanding between us, mutual respect, gratitude, and acknowledgement that together we rebuilt not just our lives, but purpose itself. Our consulting firm now spans 5 states, employing 42 dedicated individuals. We have assisted over 500 families, recovering stolen assets, providing emotional support, and empowering the elderly to protect themselves. We have testified before Congress on elder abuse prevention laws, and 3 have passed, leaving a legacy that will outlive any headlines or fleeting recognition. I think back to that rainy Thanksgiving night, the night I almost gave up, the night I felt truly discarded, but I also remember the unexpected friendship that gave me strength, the unwavering presence of William, and the resilience I discovered within myself. Those memories are no longer shadows. They are the foundation of everything I have built. 6 months after the trial, I receive a letter from Claire, the first word I have heard from her since the arrests. Her handwriting is tight, controlled, a stark contrast to the chaos she once orchestrated. The words are simple. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't expect forgiveness, but thank you for not destroying me completely when you could have. I fold the letter carefully, placing it in my desk drawer. Maybe someday I will respond, but today I have clients who need my attention, who need advocacy and protection. My purpose is here, in the present, not in rehashing the pain of the past. William pokes his head into my office, carrying the quiet confidence that has always grounded me. Ready for the board meeting? The investors love our expansion plans. I take one last look around the office, at the files, the screens, the bustling team that now carries the work we started beneath the bridge. I smile, feeling the strength and pride swell in my chest. Ready, I say. Let's show them what 2 throwaways can build. As I walk to the conference room, I catch my reflection in the window. A 67-year-old woman stares back, silver hair catching the sunlight, eyes steady, posture upright and commanding. She is a woman who refused to be discarded, who turned betrayal into purpose, who transformed pain into empowerment. She proved that the most beautiful revenge is often simply refusing to disappear, refusing to let cruelty define your life, and daring to rebuild a future filled with meaning, justice, and compassion. And as I step into the room, I know that this is only the beginning. If you've been inspired by my journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, courage, and triumph over adversity.